This episode is called So You Think It's an Easy Life in the Motor Trade. I'd left early the night before, so as I drove onto the forecourt on a Sunday morning and saw a space in my used display, I thought, great, they've sold one for me. The car that was missing was a very nice, low mileage Mitsubishi Shogun diesel. But as I walked past the empty space on my way to the office, I saw a door lock lying on the floor, and it dawned on me that my car had been stolen. My pitch was covered by 3 CCTV cameras, and I'd made sure that there were no blind spots when I'd installed them myself. I also fitted a stop lock professional crook lock to each vehicle. They were made out of high tensile steel and locked onto the steering wheel. I kept the car keys and stop locks in separate safes in separate buildings. You could say when it comes to car security, I'm a pretty cautious sort of guy. But then I was in the second year of running my own business, and I'd managed to get my trader's policy reduced from £7,500 to £4,300. Already that year, I'd absorbed the cost of several vandal attacks. I think one in particular had cost me £700 on its own. That was down to the England football team. They'd played even worse than usual in a World Cup qualifier. This had annoyed the local yobs, and they decided to pick on something that couldn't fight back, punch back or whatever. So throwing a brick at my cars, destroying a bonnet on one car and a door on the other. The fact was that if I'd claimed for every incident that had happened previously, I would already be uninsurable. I have to say, I have total respect for the job the police do, but our local bobbies had shown little interest and had been of no use whatsoever. Often they wouldn't come out for days after a vandal attack, which by that time any forensic evidence had long gone. I'd even stopped reporting things to them, as I'd amassed more victim support pamphlets than the printers. I watched the CCTV footage and saw a Vauxhall Astra van with 2 occupants reverse onto the forecourt. It wasn't even dark, people were walking past, but the thieves just carried on, oblivious to anyone. They jimmied the door lock out in seconds, got inside the car. It took them a further 5 minutes to remove the Stop Lock Pro and the steering lock and drive off. This was serious. I knew it could put me out of business, so this time I rang the police and reported the incident. I explained that I'd got CCTV footage and some forensic evidence, and that although I couldn't read the registration plate on the car, I was sure that the police had software that would enable them to. Also, we needed to act quickly to catch the thieves before they disposed of my vehicle. I also explained that I was going on holiday to Cyprus on the Thursday. The operator said she would get someone to attend as soon as possible. I knew what that meant. Monday was the deadline for placing an advert to appear in Thursday's Auto Trader magazine, and the police still hadn't been to see me. So I brought the picture of my Shogun up on my computer and proceeded to Photoshop "reward" in big yellow letters across it. I wrote out my description of the car and put a link to my web page showing every detail and about 20 pictures of the car. It was very distinctive, having bull bars, side steps, light guards, roof rack, a wooden steering wheel, and a lot more things, which I actually left out of the advert. Wednesday night, and I was leaving for Cyprus early the next morning. Still the police hadn't been to see me. I rang them again. I'd made a DVD of the CCTV footage for them, and I was really annoyed that they hadn't been to take my statement. I was now losing my patience. I made an irate call to the police HQ this time, and an officer came to my house at 10 p.m. He took my statement but told me that the DVD would probably serve no purpose, as it was very expensive to get the picture enhanced, and it probably wouldn't be done. The Shogun had a retail price of £3,495 and a trade price of £2,500. I would probably get paid the trade price from the insurance company, but my no claims bonus would be out the window. A couple of days later, the Auto Trader magazine was now in circulation. I was sunbathing by the pool at our hotel in Pathos when my mobile phone rang. The guy on the phone asked about the reward and told me he'd been at a scrapyard in a town about 30 miles away from my garage, and he'd seen two guys dismantling a Shogun, roof rack, bull bars, etc. And they were taking the bits off the car outside in the yard. He described things about the car that hadn't appeared in the advert, and I knew instantly that was my car that he'd seen. I immediately rang the police and gave them the address of the scrapyard. From what I could gather, this was the chain of events that followed. Our local police station contacted another station closer to the scrapyard, and they sent out an officer who, I'm sorry to say, will never ever make a detective as long as he's got a hole in his arse. Apparently he went and asked them if they'd seen anyone dismantling a Shogun in their yard, and they said no. That, I'm afraid, seemed to be the extent of the investigation. I was absolutely furious and rang the police officer to complain. He said, and I quote, "Look mate, you've got no chance of getting your car back, and it's a waste of our time." I thought the very least they could have done was arrest the owner of the scrapyard and waterboard him till he cracked. The evidence now pointed to the car being broken up and sold for spares. My chances of recovering it were virtually zero. This, however, didn't mean that I couldn't still make things very uncomfortable for the owner of the scrapyard. So that night, after drinking a few pints of Keo lager, I hatched a plan of revenge, which I would put into action on my return from holiday. I printed off and laminated 50 copies of my reward poster. At the time, I owned a basalt black Porsche 911 C2 Cabriolet. I put my best black suit on, Ray-Bans, and set off to stake out the scrapyard. Now, I watch a lot of cop shows, and I consider myself to be an amateur expert on covert surveillance. I watched Jim Rockford, my favourite. However, I decided I hadn't got the time for this, so I adopted the exact opposite of low profile. The scrapyard was on an industrial estate with another 6 or 7 businesses, and after fastening the laminated posters to the gates of the scrapyard, every lamppost, telegraph pole, and leaving copies in the windows of all the local shops, I then visited every other business on the industrial estate. The rest of the morning, I sat directly opposite in my Porsche with the hood down, making sure that they could see me taking note of everyone who came and went, listing each registration number and taking pictures for added effect. To my surprise, no one came across to ask me what I was doing. In my mind, this was an admission of guilt. Next morning, I was there again, bright and early, to watch the comings and goings. In the afternoon, my mobile rang with a caller blocked number. The caller, who had an Irish accent, said that he was in a pub with his mate. They were browsing the Auto Trader, which by now would have been a week out of date, and they'd recognised my stolen Shogun from the picture. It was parked outside of the pub they were in. The guy on the phone was no rocket scientist, and I suspected that I was in fact talking to the guy who'd stolen the Shogun. The vehicle was now too hot to handle, and he wanted to be rid. I arranged to meet them, and they said they would keep an eye on the car. About a quarter of a mile up the road from the pub, I spotted a white Astra van in a lay-by, just like the one I'd seen on my CCTV. I pulled over, I had a good look round it. The first thing I spotted was there were various equipped to commit tools on the passenger floor: slide hammer, chisel, screwdriver, you name it. I was convinced it was the thief's vehicle. I photographed it, wrote the registration number down, and I also committed it to memory. Then I let a few tyres down. On my way to the pub, I called in a bank, and I got myself 2 rolls of pound coins. You probably never see them these days, but you used to be able to, you go into a bank and you could buy so many pounds and it'd come in a cardboard wrap. I had 2 of these in my pockets, and I would make sure that the first person to try and hit me would go down hard. That was my plan. I rang my friend and asked him to come over as backup. When he arrived, we drove past the pub for a recce. There were no cars on the pub car park, but directly across the road from the pub was a Shogun. If it was my car, I'd never have recognised it. The bottom half of it had now been sprayed silver, and it had none of the distinguishing features that it had had before. My plan was that my friend would sit outside the pub in another car. I gave him my camera and instructed him to take pictures as they came out with me. I wanted him to get me on film handing them the reward. He also had a mobile with the numbers 999 keyed in, so that all he had to do was press send. I must add at this point, my friend was no rocket scientist either, so if I was getting a good hiding, I needed him to have to press as few buttons as possible to summon assistance. Satisfied that there was no one in the immediate vicinity waiting to ambush me, I took a deep breath and walked into the pub. I held my phone to my ear. I was pretending to be in the middle of a call, but I had it switched to video. Sweeping the room, I saw two scumbags sat in the corner with a copy of the Autotrader on the table. The only other person in there was the barmaid. Making sure that I'd got them on camera, I walked over and sat down. Placed my phone on the table and left it recording. Just how they'd been keeping an eye on the car was beyond me, as it was impossible to see from where they were. One of the guys was about 6 foot and fairly slim, and the other about 5'8" and stocky. The conversation soon got round to the reward, and I asked to see the car. We walked across the road and I played dumb. Comes pretty easy for me, you wouldn't believe it, would you? I'm afraid that's not my car, I said. It doesn't even have a wooden steering wheel. The guy says, they must have broken it when it was stolen. I got the V55 out of my pocket and checked the chassis number, which was under the rear wheel arch. Nope, it's a completely different chassis number. Again, the taller guy said, it is, they've changed the chassis number. And he bent down and scraped away the new underseal to reveal a plate welded over the top. Now it was time to call their bluff with one of my own. I turned to face them and shrugged my shoulders. Look, let's stop kidding each other. I know you guys stole it. I have you on CCTV. You were in a van with the registration number, blah, 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 which I'd memorised. And if you expect me to give you a reward for returning it to me, you're in for a big disappointment. It's only a matter of time before the police arrest you. Now fuck off before I ring them. My registration bluff worked because they went even paler than they already were. They made no attempt to protest their innocence and sloped off cursing me. Feeling quite proud of my achievement, I rang the police officer I'd spoken to before and I said, remember the car I had no chance of getting back? Well, I've just got it back and I'm just about to take possession and drive it home. Thanks for nothing. I was really just ringing to gloat, but also I didn't want to take the chance that Colombo had been transferred to the Wantleydale police force and that I'd get arrested on the way home for stealing my own car. On reflection, winding the police officer up wasn't the brightest thing I've ever done. And to my surprise, the officer told me that I couldn't touch the car until forensics had inspected it and dusted it for fingerprints. This really pissed me off, and I told him I didn't need fingerprints as I knew who'd stolen it, and I'd even got photographs of them. The officer never took me up on this, but assured me that I could face serious consequences if I took my own vehicle, as I would be interfering in a criminal investigation. Also, the vehicle would probably need to be used in evidence at any future trial, so I wouldn't be able to sell it either if they'd managed to gather enough evidence to prosecute. The Shogun was picked up about 2 hours later by a recovery vehicle, even though I had the keys to drive it. I got it back a few weeks later. No evidence was found in it, and I was in a catch-22 situation. The police never asked me how I'd managed to get the Shogun back, and I couldn't volunteer any information, as it would mean that I would again be made to suffer financially. To add insult to injury, I was presented with a £185 bill off the recovery firm who the police had sent to pick up the car. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.